Welcome back, Super Pros, and we're back with another info-packed video. In this video, we're going to talk through how to not create a mess out of your Power App form, trying to accommodate for the 3 different scenarios when customizing a SharePoint list form. So what do I mean by that? With SharePoint list forms, there's certain considerations you have to take into account. They're interacting with the list and your Power App form. So as a user, I have all my entries in the list. I can create a new entry, and my Power App form have to handle that scenario. I can view existing entries, and here you have to handle these scenarios as well. Obviously, this is a read-only fashion. As you can see here, everything's read-only. They're not expecting me to make any changes to this form. Not only until I click on the item, then click edit, which is the third mode, that I'm able to actually manipulate data or add data or update existing data and save that off. How do you account for all of those scenarios within your Power App form? Can you do that in a single screen? Does it require multiple screens? We're going to cover a lot of those details, a lot of the issues and situations we have in our contact form, and we're going to walk through how to resolve some of those hurdles and pitfalls. A lot to unpack here, so let's get started. Okay, so what we want to do is talk about screen management, especially for a Power App form that's tied to a SharePoint list, or you're creating a custom SharePoint list using the Power App form. And with that, there's a lot of considerations that needs to be had and needs to be baked into your solution, so that way the user experience flows as expected. And 2, we're validating data along the way, depending on the various modes of our form. So when I say the various modes of our form, let's just level set to make sure that we're set on the terminology. We know we're probably used to this already. But we want to add vocabulary around it. So the first one is new, and this is what I'm gonna call the new form and our new mode. And this is when they're creating a brand new entry. Okay, so there's a certain screen navigation that we want to account for that. The other one is going to be view mode, and this is where they're not entering the item is actually in read only, and they need the ability to navigate through the different pages. All right, so we're going to talk through some of the logic and configuration needed for that. And then the last one will be edit mode. This is where they're modifying an existing. So with those 3 modes, you have to make sure that you have the right logic and you're controlling the flow, and you're making sure we have the right logic in place for data integrity. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and click on new, and then I'm going to click on customize Power Apps. And the reason why I clicked on new first, because this is going to set my Power App Studio into the new mode scenario, right? And then from here, we can just put in all of our logic, and then we account for the edit and view, and then make sure things flow as expected. Okay, so here we are in new, and actually it did not put me in new mode unless it's just grabbing the first item in the list. But to make all of this work, and this only is available to us when we're doing a custom SharePoint list using a custom SharePoint form using Power Apps, and that's going to be SharePoint integration node. And the SharePoint integration node, those 3 modes that I talked about, are going to be available to us here. And in previous videos, we went through and set this variable to the var form mode variable to the right value or enum value based on the mode that the user clicked on. So if they clicked on the new button, this is going to set the form mode enum into the var form mode variable. If they clicked on the edit button to edit an existing item in the SharePoint list, it's going to put in the edit enum. And then if they just clicked on the item, an existing item, but they did not click on edit, meaning that they're in view, we set this form mode to view. Now that we have that form mode being toggled based on what the user clicked in our form, and as well as in our buttons, we can now make some decision to add in the needed logic based on what we expect the flow to be. So if you look at new, this one, for the most part, accounts for all of the scenarios we need for new, except for engagement, vehicles, and history. Now, if I look at engagement, notice how I have my previous and save buttons here, but do I really want to save before we get to vehicles, right? I really want them to be able to, when they're creating a brand new entry, I want to really walk them through completing the client information, clicking next, completing the engagement information, clicking next, adding the needed vehicles, and clicking next. Okay, so this is our history. So what does the history supposed to look like? So let's look back to our wireframe. And remember, this is our wireframe we created in mockups. And I highly recommend that you have a wireframe created, so that way you know that, for your different scenarios, for your different screens, what is the general layout. And usually these can be straw man, meaning that boxes and circles, not really a lot of UI treatment. What you see here is probably a step or two above what a basic wireframe should look like, but highly recommend. So if you look at the wireframe, our history screen is supposed to be really just a running comments. So there's not going to be a lot of history when we're creating a brand new item. So in our scenario, once we hit vehicles, we probably want to give them the option to save. But then after the save, go ahead and navigate them to the history screen, and then you have the option to close. That's just going to train them to always understand that, each one of these screens are going to have that ability. All right, so let's go ahead and make the needed changes for our new scenario. So the first thing I want to do is look at my next button and just navigating to my screen, and that's fine. Look at my cancel button, and this is going to hide or close the application. And for the very first screen, that makes sense. So if they clicked on new just because they were curious, I want them to navigate to the next screen, but I only want them to navigate to the next screen if and only if they completed all the required fields on this screen. So in order to do that, I'll show you a little trick. If you do a if, and then the name of your form on the main screen, we're going to do form main, and then there's a property called valid. And this is only true if they completed all of the required fields on the existing form or the form that you specify. So in our case, this is going to be the form on the main screen, with the understanding that I have a different form instance or an engagement and so on and so forth. So for my main screen, I'm going to make sure it's valid. If it's valid, then we're going to navigate. If it's not valid, we're actually going to submit the form. And the reason why we submit the form is for the sole reason to show the validation errors, right? Because submit form would not submit unless everything is valid. So we're kind of playing some tricks here that says, okay, if they're valid, go ahead and navigate. Don't submit the form because we're not ready to save it to the SharePoint list. But if it's not valid, submit the form so that way they can see the errors that they need to complete, and then they'll try it again, and then this would then navigate because they completed all the issues. All right, so that's going to be that, and I think that was pretty straightforward. So that's going to be our guide. Let me make sure I put that logic in the right button. Yep, so that's good. So now for engagement, let's take a look here. Okay, this is a save, and we don't want this to be a save, right? We actually want them to complete the vehicles first. So actually, let's delete all of this. Let's delete. Actually, let's save it. Let's copy it. Only because that was a lot of code, and I'm like, okay, do I really want to remember how I put all that together? So I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna actually go to vehicles, the vehicle screen, and then just paste that there, and that's going to bring over the formulas, my variables, and my logic is off, right? Because I'm a screen ahead from where it came from, but at least I'll have a starting point, and I can remind myself what my intentions were. Now that we're back on screen engagement, basically all we have to do is something very similar to what we did in main. So let me copy this, go to engagement, click on save, and erase everything that I had initially. Okay, so let's update this to be in the context of screen engagement. So for screen engagement, I'm not looking at the main form, I'm looking at the engagement form. And I want to make sure that's valid. If it is, I'm going to go to the next screen, which is not screen engagement, but screen vehicles. And if it's not valid, then submit the form, and it's not form main in this scenario, it's going to be form engagement. All right. I think this is solid. Let's double check our previous. No, our previous is going back to form. No, this is actually not correct at all. Our previous should be going to screen main. It should not even be looking at a form object. I'm not sure how that one slipped through. And my cancel's still there. This is there. Okay, so instead of stand save, we actually want to use the word text. Next. So for the most part, and I can check this right. I can hold on my Alt key and then click on previous. I navigate there, click on next. I navigate there, click on next. And hold up, let's go back. Wait, now I'm thoroughly confused. This previous should go to screen main, which it did. Next, next. Oh, this previous should go to screen engagement. And it still had that form in there, which is odd. All right. Yeah, because this was a copy paste, so these were not wired up. Okay, so the one thing I did not like was when I click next here, I need to have, we're going to get rid of that status, ignore that for now. I need to make sure they put in a dealership and the primary rep or the sales rep that's like the account manager for this client. So I want to make these required, and this should be really straightforward. It should be go to the data card. Wait. So I'm on the right form. Go to the data card, dealership, and set the field to true. And if you have not been following me, one of the cautionary tales that I remind everyone is that for your required fields, you do not set the column required on the SharePoint list. That always bites you in the future, right? In the end, once you start building out your Power Automate, all your required fields get in the way, right? Because when you get in Power Automate to do simple updates, if everything's required, you have to specify the value. It really adds to your dev cycles. So, and really, you only need it for user input, for human input, right? So here, we're going to make sure that they're going to be required, but we're going to set the required flag on the form itself versus on the SharePoint list. All right. All right. So now that these are required, and now if I click next, I should get an error. There we go. That's exactly what we want. So I'll go ahead and specify keyline, click next, and now we're ready to rock and roll to put in our vehicle information. All right. So now I think all we need to do is to save this. Now, understand this, and I probably should create another video to really kind of highlight this. When you're adding your Tesla vehicles associated to this client, and if I click on, let's just click on edit here just to kind of show this screen. Let me go into preview mode. I probably can't do it. All right, so once we get into SharePoint and we start testing this, you will see that when we start adding the Tesla vehicles, those vehicles are saved right away, or straight away, as some of my colleagues used to say. So those are saved right away, and that again, this is a business requirement. Technically, it's super easy to save it right away, right? Because you don't have to jump through a lot of hoops. But from a business perspective and maybe a data integrity perspective, they may want them to add their vehicles, but the save only action happens until they explicitly click the save button. So in our scenario, we're not going to do that. We're going to take the technical easy route, which may not be the best business experience. And then we'll circle back and figure out what hoops we have to jump through to make this save button save everything, not just the forms in the previous screen, but also the collection that's being created through the gallery using this vehicle add screen. But for now, let's take the easy way out and leave that logic as is. So as they're adding a vehicle, they're saving it right away. But in this scenario, when they click save, we want them to save, and this all looks right, especially for new. We want them to create a new record, and we want to save the changes that they made in the form. We want the main form. We want to save the changes they made in the engagement form, and all of that's going to be saved to this item. Now, if this seems a little bit foreign to you, basically what's happening is that instead of having those nasty patch statements, right? When you create the JSON and you have to map the site column with the field name and the field values and all the other stuff, this is a more scalable and elegant syntax to where, one, you break up your site columns into multiple forms. So these forms represent the same SharePoint list item, but I'm breaking it up in bits and pieces so that way whatever was grabbed in form instance A or main form, I'm going to add those site columns here, values, and then whatever was captured for the engagement pieces of the SharePoint list item, I'm capturing those items, and this one statement would make sure each column value gets saved for the same record, right? This is not going to create multiple records. And this is the way that you get around that hurdle of breaking your form up into your SharePoint list schema, right? You may have 20 or 30 columns, how to break that up into multiple forms so it's easy to digest and actually you build something that's maintainable and elegant from a developer standpoint. Okay, so once we do that, we do want to reset our forms, right? We want to get the old values out, and make sure they're blank. But we do not want to request hide. That's going to be the one change we don't want. But instead of request hide, let's navigate them to the history screen, which you still need to build out. That's why that's blank if you ever was wondering once you saw that. Okay, I think we're wired up. So let's go ahead and save this. And again, this is going to be our new scenario. Okay, so now that we're in the SharePoint list, I went through my cycles of refreshes, and now that I click new, here's another pet peeve I have is when I click new, I should always start at the first page. What tends to happen if I'm on item number 3 or, item ID 3, for an example, and I close the window and I was on the vehicle screen, when I click new, it remembers the last screen I was on, and that's where it starts my process. And that's something we don't want, right? So for new, we always want to start at the top, and we don't want to confuse the user by starting them in the middle of a screen process. So here, let me just put in my information. All right, so here I have my information in. Let me go ahead and purposely leave the zip code off, click next. There's my validation. Now I have all the required fields inputted, and it allows me to navigate. If I click next, there's my validation. Again, I have all my required fields in, click next, and then now I can add my vehicles, right? So this is exactly how we expect the new form experience to be. Now the question is, what do we want our experience to be when they're trying to edit each screen? So if they're going into an existing item and they just want to make updates or edits, what should these buttons and what should the navigation experience be? So here, and there's another thing, right? This is my view. Actually, in the view, I want to hide this. Let's do that first. So let's hide the buttons in view and force the user. If I hide these, I'm forcing the user to use this breadcrumb navigation or the site navigation to bounce between screens. And I think this is valid, right? Because basically, if I'm view, I just want to see the vehicles for this particular item, right? And if I go to Jason, I just want to see Jason's vehicles. And if I go to Tony Tubbs, I just want to see his vehicles, right? I don't want to have to go through your navigation tree just to get the answer on screen 3. And in this scenario, you remember how I said that I hate that when they click new, it keeps me on the screen I was on in the previous one? From a view perspective, this is actually pretty convenient because now if I'm looking at all the engagements, I'm just clicking through each one of these. And that's a much better experience, especially for an admin, to where I don't have to click on the item and then click down to engagement. Click on the item, then click down to engagement. I have engagement open, and I can click through that. And the same may be true for history, right? So I have a history. I just want to see the history for these different items, and I'm just really navigating through these different items, and I can quickly see the history. So in that scenario, if I'm not in a new mode, maybe I do want to keep the last screen that the user was on, right? Just for a convenience and a much better user experience. So it seems like it works in one scenario, but it may not work in the other. But we have the tools and all the Lego pieces needed to accommodate both, which is super refreshing now that we're using Power Apps versus InfoPath or any third-party SharePoint form generator that we had in the past. So let's do this. I lost my train of thought. Okay, we're hiding buttons for view. So if I go to Power Apps, and for each screen, to force the user to use the site navigation, I'm gonna just select these guys, right? So select my buttons, and I love that. So I can highlight a couple of components at the same time, and if I specify or change the value on the property, it's going to impact both. Very similar to grouping. So here, I probably didn't want to group these, right? I want to keep them independent because they all have different click events and all the other stuff. But for this, for convenient, I do want to hide them both at the same time. So what I want to do for my form mode, again, I want to leverage my form mode. If this is not view, then show it, right? So if you're not view mode, so this is going to be true in every scenario except for view, then the visible is going to be true. And in this case, if it is view, this is going to be false, and visibility is going to be false. And this is exactly what I want for all my buttons. So let me navigate to engagement, drop in the same, and then navigate to vehicles and drop in the same. And then for history, we didn't have anything there, so I think we're good to go. Okay, so now we have that for view. Let's go ahead and see what do we need for edit. Now for edit, we want the scenario where, let's just bounce back to our screen. For edit, we want the scenario where they're on this screen and they click edit, and I just want them to update this particular screen. So it's not necessarily a next, right? Because I don't want them to have to navigate to the last screen and then click save, if they're just making simple changes to engagement clients in that screen. So in that scenario, what I want for edit mode is, all right, this item exists, you just want to change a value, go to that screen, make a change, and instead of going next, this is going to be update, right? So now not only do we want to put in the logic to change that to update, we also need to put in the logic to make sure that that's a save versus a navigate, right? So again, so if I go to, let's do the easy one first. The easy one is to change the text property. So again, going back to my trusty old form mode, if it's new, we want to show next, else we want to show update. Now notice how I'm only accounting for those two modes in this scenario. I don't have to account for the view mode because my button's not going to show in view mode anyway, so that kind of saves me some logic and keystrokes in the formula, because I really just need to accommodate you either new or edit, because in view you're not going to see this anyway, so let me just account for the ones when the button is visible. All right, so that's going to be true for the button on main, and that's going to be true for the button on engagement. So that's just simply a simple copy and paste. And for vehicles, we want to do the same. Okay. All right. So that's the easy part. The challenging part is, what's the difference in the logic between the two scenarios? So now if I go to on select, what we're doing here is we want to make sure the form is valid. In both scenarios, that's still true. But this, if it is valid, what I do after that is where my condition is going to come. So let's just open this up a little bit and let's think through this, because how you put this logic together, you could either make it super confusing for the developer behind you, or you can kind of make it somewhat intuitive. And I say somewhat because either way you go, it's not going to be clear. And I'm going to show you how to use comments for these types of scenarios where someone behind you may come and look at this and say, wait, what are they trying to do here? So if it's valid, this is where our condition changes for view and new, for edit and new. If it's not valid, this condition is still the same. We still want to submit and show the validation errors. So for the is valid, I'm actually wrap another if statement. This is what I would recommend doing. Okay. So if it is valid and the form mode is new, go ahead and do your navigate, no harm, no foul. But if it's not a new form, then I need you to submit the form main, right? Which is going to be the current form on the current screen, right? And basically that's how you do that. And then what I would recommend is adding the comments to say what we're trying to achieve and why we have this logic here. All right, so here I'm just using my comment section to just kind of highlight this is what we're trying to do. And let's just confirm this works as expected before we go ahead and update our engagement screen. All right, let's see if our logic holds true. So here we are in the view screen, and we notice that there are no buttons, there's no action buttons. That's exactly what we want. And now once we go into edit mode on the client, you notice that I do have an update option. So if I click update, that's still going to fire off the validation because state is missing. So now I just go ahead and select the state and click update, and that's going to update that one single screen. And that's exactly what we want, right? Because we want a better user experience to where we have different logic for new and control and make sure to ensure the data integrity. And then for the view and edit, they probably want to be very actionable and just want to update like the missing representative for this particular client. And then they can go ahead and simply update that without having to go through the next process. Now you notice that once I click update for engage, it went to the next screen, and that's where we want to update that logic. So our main screen update logic seems to hold true. So let's go ahead and copy this, go to the engagement screen, and then modify its update button logic to accommodate the same. Okay, so here I have both instances of the code. The previous logic is on the first line, and then the logic we copied in from the previous screen is on the subsequent lines. And basically what we want to do is, if form engagement is valid, so let's just go ahead and do some copy and pasting here. If it's new mode, we want to go ahead and navigate to the next screen. So in this case, it's going to be screen vehicles. And then our submit form would be in the context of form engagement. And then this is if the validation did not pass, we want to submit the form engagement again in that scenario, because we want to show the validation errors. So this submit, just to recap, this submit updates the value, and this submit is going to show the errors in the validation. Okay, so that's going to be that piece. So next, once we look at our screen, the other piece we want to do is when you're on vehicles, this is the last step. So you click update for vehicles as well, and that should save the screen in edit mode. But in new mode, if you're on vehicles, we don't want to go next because there's no history in the creating a new record scenario. The history only comes from editing and updating this list item over time, this client record over time. So in this scenario, we actually want that, instead of going next, to actually say save. So let's update that for vehicles. Yeah, so currently right now in the update action, we have the patch statement, which is going to account for all the changes in the previous forms. And then we're going to reset those forms, and then we're going to navigate to screen history. So instead of navigating the screen history, what we want to do is request exit or request a hide. And what request hide does is it actually closes the dialog box, very similar to if the user clicked the out of the box save. What this is going to do is save the record and then close it if their validations are passed on each and every screen. And that's exactly what we want here. So once they update the vehicle information, instead of going next, we actually want them to go ahead and hide the screen. So the other thing we have to do, once we look at the text for this button, I know we had this logic for next and update for all the other screens, but when it comes to history, the vehicle screen, we really just want to do update. There's no next option in all scenarios. So this is just going to be hard-coded as update with no additional logic that's needed. Okay, so let's just go ahead and save this and make sure this is working as expected. Okay, so here we are. Let's go ahead and test our three scenarios, the new, the edit, and the view. So on new, if I try to go next, my validation kicks in. Okay, so now that I have all my fields completed, I click next, I pass validation, and it allows me to go to the next screen. I put in this information, click next, it allows me to go to the next screen. And then I can go in and add additional vehicles. And then that was saved as expected. We actually have an error at this point. So once I save that, I bring in way more vehicles than what's associated to this client, way more than the one vehicle that I added for that dialog. And that's going to be an issue. And that's something that we need to address, because when you create in a brand new item and you have a one-to-many relationship, there are certain tricks that you have to play to make that happen. So let's tackle that in the next video. But for now, as far as our screen navigation and experience, this is working as expected. So that's going to be new. And if I go to edit, actually, let's do view. So if I go to view, outside of this country displaying as if it's in edit mode, we probably want to modify the UI treatment on that to make it look like it's a read-only field like the others on the screen. This is actually working as expected. Now, history needs to be updated because that's just going to be a simple gallery. So let's ignore that. We're going to have a whole screen dedicated to the history and how to create a custom commenting system within Power Apps. But that's going to, the user can navigate through the different screens using this navigation button. That's fine. We don't have any on-screen action buttons, which is what we want. And then when I go to edit, I can use this navigation button to navigate to the various areas, satisfy the validation on that screen, then click update, and that's going to update as expected. And now I can go through any screen, be very actionable, make the change needed for a particular item, click update, and then that's going to say, oh, this should have closed out, shouldn't it? What happened here? Let's go take a look and see what happened. Interesting. Let's try some refresh. The logic seems right. So let's go to edit mode, click update. I should not have to do a request hide in this scenario. So on new, navigate. If it's not new, submit the form. Oh, wait 1 second. Let's see. Yeah, so for this update button, we have to, when we do the submit form for form engagement and do a request hide, we have to, this normally has a request hide inside of it. Now, this is an interesting point because this is not working, even though the previous screen works with almost the exact same code, with the exception of the forms being different. And the biggest takeaway for this one is going to be this submit form. And you have to understand what happens behind the scene with the submit form. So let's take a look at that. So when you call this submit form and you specify the form component to submit, you have to go to, that executes the either success or on failure event for the form component. So in this scenario, let's look at the form engagement and then go to the drop down. This is a really good catch and gotcha that that's going to allow us to view this. So you have these three actions. So you have that reset form function, which is going to then call, it's going to reset it and then call this event. You have the submit form function that submits the form and then it calls this event. The submit form function also calls this event if it fails validation. So let's look at on success. So here on success, I have a reset form for self, but I don't have a request hide. And that's why it's making the update, resetting the form, but it does not close it out. So let's compare this to the other component to try to troubleshoot and see. So if I go to the form main, which works as expected with the exact same code, and I go to the on success, notice the difference. So it not only does it reset the form, but it also requests hide. So this is the logic we want to make sure that all of our forms have, so that way they're all performing the same way when you submit the form. So that's going to be that, and then I only have these two forms. Okay, fair enough. So now once I add that, me panicking, I add the request hide explicitly here, and that will confuse the developer behind me. So let's remove that and make it clear that the exact same code that works on the previous screen is going to work on this screen, even though we're swapping out the forms because everything now is created equal. Okay, so now that I'm on engagement, I did a couple of refresh. I click update. Looks like I need more refreshes. Hopefully it works. This should work. There we go. That's more like it. All right. So now this is working as expected. The last thing we want to cover is we leverage this navigation element for the view, and we leverage this navigation element for the edit. We don't want the users to leverage that navigation element when they're creating a brand new item. And that's something that we need to take a closer look at. Now this is, oh, I was wondering, I was like, why is that form having information? That's history, it's not developed yet. So there's a lot of logic missing. So when you hit new, I don't want the user to, and you should not want the user to bypass your validation by using this navigation, right? For view and edit is fine because they had to complete this information in order for that record to get into the SharePoint list. So we're kind of it's implied that we're covered in that scenario, and we don't have to over-engineer this form to account for a scenario that may never happen or have a very small percentage chance of happening. But in this scenario, this is likely to happen pretty frequently, where they're presented with this information, they get used to using this navigation in our other scenarios, and now they're just skipping through and trying to submit things prematurely, and we get what you see here, empty or a bad record within our solution, and that's what we want to avoid. So to avoid that, what we want to do in the new mode is to disable this navigation. And this navigation is, if you watch every video in this series, it's a custom component. And the logic is really simple. So what we want to do, so our custom component is here, it's going to be that CMP navigation that's over here in the tree, the component tree. And basically all we want to do is pass it we don't necessarily want to hide it, but we do want to disable it. Wait, how bad would it look if we hit it? Maybe we do want to hide it. Let's see. So if you hide it, how bad does it look? Actually, not bad. Let's hide it. We're going to see. I was going to show you how to add an extra property to actually disable it, keep it visible, but disable it so it wouldn't click. So I'm gonna take the easy way out. If you want to see the other way, just leave me a comment. And if I get, 5+ people who actually want to see it, then I'll make another video with it. So this becomes super easy now. So for this scenario, visible, let's turn it on. Let's hard code it true. Basically, it's, as you're probably coding in your head, if view form does not equal, and I type in the word new only because the IntelliSense recognize that this variable saves enums, and I don't know if it's that smart, but I'll type in new and it knows that I'm looking for the enum form mode new versus a string new, and that saves me a couple of keystrokes. So if this is not new, then visible is true, which means show it. And I just do that for each and every screen. Wow, we got off lucky on that one. I was thinking I would have to walk through the whole process of creating a custom property within the custom form, then calling that. And by the way, it's going to be the exact same logic. I just needed a property other than visible, right? Because it's a custom component. I get a handful of out-of-the-box properties, like some of your core base ones that the component inherits, right, because of its base component or base class. But then I get these other ones for free because of the fact that it is a component. But you have the flexibility of creating these custom ones in that property dropdown for your component. And I was going to do a is enabled or is disabled, whichever way you want it to go. But the logic is the exact same. It's going to be form mode not equal to new to make it enabled or something like that, right? But we're going to hide it because it doesn't look bad when it's hidden. All right, so because we got that one for free or for cheap, let's just go ahead and save this, push this out, and see what we're looking at. Let's go ahead and delete this bad record because we don't want that in there floating around, create problems later. So I go new, it's still visible. There we go. So new is hidden, forcing them to complete the process, right? And edit is visible. I'm sorry, view is visible, and I can bounce between the screens, all right? So let's talk about what's next. What's next, what we probably want to do, I have a lot of these issues with my drop downs not bringing back the data that's saved. and that's throughout, right? So we're going to have a dedicated video on drop down state management. I got to think of a better name for that. But it's basically, we have these custom drop downs, right, that grabs information to populate the drop down from different data sources. It's a beautiful thing, something that's really straightforward and intuitive in Power Apps, which was jumping through a lot of hoops with InfoPath and index forms and da. So we're working this magic, but there's a part of the story, the edit and update story to that magic that we did not account for. And that's throughout, right? That was just missed. So we need to circle back and pepper that in. The other one we need is adding vehicles. Now, anytime, and I think this is worth its own video, because anytime that you have a one-to-many relationship, you have your main request form or your main input form list, right, that's grabbing all the data from the input or from the form and saving it in that. And then there's a primary key that becomes the hinge or the hook of all this other ancillary data, right? So either lookup data or one-to-many data or many-to-many scenarios, or whatever the case may be. The problem that you have with new is that the ID that we would naturally lock in to create that hinge between the two is not available until you submit a brand new record. So that creates a whole new world of scenarios. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this and if you've been doing Power Apps for a while, you have your own tips and tricks on how you solve that. And there's many different ways on how to solve it. So I'll give you my take on it in the next video, and then together, we can learn. So at least you have another option, or we may gravitate to the same option. So it'd be very interesting to see where we land. So that's going to be the next video. Any questions on this? Feel free to leave it in the comment section. If you want me to go through that custom component with a custom property scenario, leave that in the comment section. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.